Okay, let's get started. So my name is Linda. I'm co-founder and managing director of Fulfillmenttools. And in the next 45 minutes, I'm very excited to talk with you about how technological advancements really drive the success of REWE Group. And for those of you who don't know REWE Group yet, REWE Group is one of Europe's largest grocery retailers with more than 10,000 stores and more than 90 billion euros in revenues. And I'm very excited to be joined today by one of the leaders and visionaries when it comes to digitization and innovation at REWE Group. So the person next to me is actually a trained physicist, has then started his career in the aerospace, and then was architect and CTO for various IT companies. And one of the milestones I'm always very, very impressed with is his developments for Java at Sun Microsystems. I have to say that. And after that, he really leveraged his experience and joined e-commerce companies and has been driving REWE Group's digitalization for more than 10 years right now. And I can tell you all, he is also, besides this amazing career, he is an absolutely wonderful person to work with. We know each other for quite a while. So welcome, Robert Zores, Chief Digital Innovation Officer at REWE Group.
Thanks, Linda. Perfect. So it's an interesting setup for me, giving quite a few talks on stage, but having 4 at least in parallel is quite new to me. So this is interesting. But anyway, I enjoy being here, accompanied by Linda, because she is a really cool person I worked with for a long time. When we started our journey at REWE Group, which is, by the way, really large. I'm in that company for, let's say, 11 years now, and I would not say I have understood the company completely. Maybe just a little background. Since we are operating in Germany under the brand REWE, there are many brands you might know across Europe. For example, in the eastern parts of Europe, there is a brand called Billa, where we are large in. And northeast is Iki in the Baltic countries. So we have roughly 400,000 employees in our company, so quite large and interesting. But today we are focusing a little bit on the retail part of it.
Yes.
Because that's the biggest part of the REWE Group. But the REWE Group as such has also tourism, for example. If you are traveling with us, you might know the brand DER. Or 16 other brands in there. So we are the second largest tourism company in Europe. And this comes all together in terms of innovation, in terms of new businesses and interesting cases we will talk about.
Yes.
Fulfillment and obviously retail and the delivery aspect is then transported into tourism, which is a different way of delivering things. But anyway.
I think we have to say, for full disclosure, that REWE is a customer of Fulfillmenttools and an investor in Fulfillmenttools.
Yes.
And maybe, Robert, let's get started. So for the past at least 10 years, REWE has invested heavily in technology and digitalization. Why did REWE do that in a such more serious way than many, many other large corporations? So very often you have a setup, you have like a digital unit with like 50 developers and they develop some tools. But the way REWE did it was so much more serious. You invest in innovation through so many different formats and initiatives. And what are the thoughts behind it? What is the strategy, and why do you treat it so much more seriously than so many other really large organizations?
Yeah, maybe if I start from the very beginning on when I was asked to work for that company, and I'm pretty much out of the, let's say, startup world and did a few startups in my former life. I was asked from the top management of the REWE Group, could you please help us to digitize the company as such? They made a bad experience in 2012 and 13 when one of the let's say, not really largest, but one of the big electronic vendors went more or less out of business. Such a large group typically pays a lot of money to get this sorted, and then they have realized it's not only offline stores, it's not only for a customer having nothing online. And so then we began this journey. And as large enterprises, they typically do it, and if they really have understood what they're doing, they invest from the beginning on. We were 4 people in the very beginning. Linda joined, I think, I don't know.
Quite early on.
Quite early on, yes. And we grew like hell, to be honest. And with that, I'm a tech guy working at that time as a CTO for that company. I was pushing really hard with some ideas. Typically, in such an environment, we are a cooperative. Nobody really understood what was going on. But they realized in the market things are changing quite heavily. As it's now, by the way, I typically propose every 10 to 15 years major changes in technology. With AI, the next big thing is coming up. And at these days, it was about the digitalization landscape. Technologically, it was all about microservices and these things and bigger components. And that was the reason why we have invested in those things.
So you said you have like your own teams that work on innovation, that test out stuff, and you also invest in companies,
Yes.
like Fulfillmenttools. What are like the areas you focus on when investing, and how do you typically find those companies, or how do you approach those companies?
Actually, it has changed over time. In the very beginning, we were concentrating on our capabilities, methodologies of delivering food for our end customers. This was the main focus. And within that, we were really thinking, well, this is a hell of investment, pretty expensive. How can we get back a little bit of that money, except from the services we are obviously building? And then we came up with the idea, okay, let's participate other companies from our experience and let the IT teams and those, let's say, fresh companies or where we invested in be on the free market, so to say. And it turns out this was a smart move, because in a grocery world, there are not much differentiators from a technology perspective. That was the reason why we did this step.
And why don't you keep the companies to yourself? Like you say, you talked about the external market. It would also be an option to just say, okay, we just leave them for us, REWE. We are huge. And why do you keep investing for the external market?
Yeah, this is a good question, but typically then you still remain as a large enterprise. Everything is inside. You don't get any fresh ideas and no opportunities on the real market. So that's why we have founded companies with the goal, a long-term goal, to sell maybe parts of that company or the whole company over time. And we just consume their services, which is good for us, because we are a big retailer for food and tourism and DIY, but we are not a software company as such. But growing these kind of companies, like we did with Commerce for example, Ecommerce company, this is the way to go. And interestingly, whatever we invested, we got back in an interesting multiple. So much better approach, to be honest.
So you mentioned Commerce, and also looking at our company, we are built in the same way in terms of architecture.
Yes.
And you are a techie at heart. So when it comes to architecture in your tech stack, when scaling retail operations, and also retail operations where you really count the cents, the margins, what is important for you as a CTO?
As a CTO, it was pretty important to scale the companies, to scale the business, because we are quite big. It has to scale rather quick. So this means in 2014 it was all around, let's say, the Spotify, Scrum, agile models or whatever. And technologically, since I'm an old Java guy, I defined, just to let you know, the Java Enterprise Edition at Sun Microsystems with some friends. And the next step was obviously microservices. Having a microservice in 2014 was kind of a strange thing because nobody knew what it was. And with that idea in mind, we were able to set up teams in parallel, working on different service units in different areas, because in e-commerce, you need to tackle a lot of problems. It's not only the website or the app or whatever, it's taking care for the logistics, taking care for the payment, how to integrate that. It was a pain at these days because the typical software models you could get were large and big chunks of software, not very flexible. On the other side, we were thinking in our terms of having delivery services in our markets from the warehouses, highly automated and all these things, and then having these components on the other side which were not really flexible was really a pain. And from that perspective, we tried to make also a move to a component model which should make it easy for companies like us, or maybe for smaller companies or for other companies, actually using this kind of a model as a de facto standard. This was the MACH Alliance, Microservices, API, Cloud, and Headless. And that was a common idea, and I followed that idea with all the other things and startups I used to work with. And having that, I was also pushing into the market and asking other companies, are you aware of that model? Would you buy into that model and develop software more or less with the same goal of being flexible, being light and easy, and not using all the whole stack of it, but just what is needed for your business? That was the idea.
Yeah. And it's also so much more cost effective, right?
Yeah, this comes on the side.
Yeah.
But from a cost perspective, it produces high costs for the architects because you have to have really bright architects to build these things. Because typically when we build software, it should last for at least 15, maybe 20 years. And this is costly from the very beginning on. So the effects are not really quick. It takes at least 6 to 12 months to see what's coming out.
And so at REWE, you have a system landscape of external systems, commodity software you buy, but also internal systems that you have built yourself, your tech teams have built. What would you say is the best strategy versus buy and build? Where would you say it makes sense to buy commodity software? We talked about the external market. And where do you think it makes sense to get the innovation from inside, from building it yourself?
Well, the typical make and buy or make and buy sometimes software, configure it or whatever. I typically use the example from SAP. SAP is, I don't think, a really flexible and modularized system, even if their marketing tells you that. It's not the case. But they have obviously some interesting software components which solve problems in at least large companies. And the question is then how to adapt or how to bind an ecosystem which is needed for our current world to be more flexible with those systems. And then we actually ask ourselves in each and every architecture decision, is that software something which makes a difference? Is it worth buying that or licensing it? Or is it worth developing it on our own? Right now, we are moving into a, let's say, buyer's world. So we look really into buying more software because over time, over the last 10 years, the software components became much better, maybe except SAP, but even they moved on and went to the cloud and all these things. Not as bad as it's probably seen sometimes. But I think it becomes easier to buy software like fulfillment tools, like payment tools, since we have a couple of those companies in the market which help to solve the typically developers' dilemma.
Okay, then tell us a little bit about one of the most successful innovation projects at REWE. So REWE has undergone a transformation to more self-service stores, to more pick-and-go, cashless stores. Where did this journey start? What were the pitfalls, the challenges? Because I think it's a very classical innovation journey where you start with something small and then it becomes pretty big. And where is REWE today when it comes to really new retail formats?
Yeah, maybe the delivery service in the very beginning was a really success story. It was one of the typical problems in Germany. Nobody wanted to pay for that service, but they really want to have it. But from a margin perspective in grocery, that's not an easy task. Rather complicated. Yeah. But anyway, over time, we solved it. We built even our own delivery center. At these days, it was in 2017. It was the most advanced logistics automatic hub for groceries. We had at least 12 different temperature zones in that. Really complicated, even if you're minus 25 degrees and you want to automate stuff that in there with computers. Not an easy thing. But once we had solved that problem, it was basically in 18, 19, we had this delivery service running and up and running, and it was stable. We looked with our teams into different areas. At these days, we were starting with computer vision, AI stuff at the very beginning. And we figured that with that idea, there could be more possible, more automation as we did it in the warehouses. And we were thinking, well, from a customer perspective, it works. Cost-wise, it was okay. A delivery service for food is, I don't know anybody who says, well, this is a big business, this is something you really make money with. But if you take the cost under control and you automate most of the stuff you are doing, then you might get a good business out of that. And computer vision at these days was something where we were thinking of maybe it can help us in the stores because it was helping us in the warehouses to some extent. And so we were thinking of doing something like what we call a sensor fusion. So not only computer vision, but also weight sensors, other sensors, hall sensors, which are good for detecting people in front of something or whatever. And then we made experience with a couple of companies, not only here in Europe, but also in Israel and in the US, also tackling that problems. I think in 19, we talked to roughly 30, 40 companies playing in that field. Even with a big company with, let's say, a slick search engine, they were thinking about that, going into the offline world, but it was difficult for them. So they had all the computer vision stuff because it's in some of their cars already. But in our markets, it's more complicated. And at the end, we found a company in Israel we talked to, and they were brave enough to test things out with us. And we let them into our stores. And at these days, also another big company, large company, was coming up with that idea, having a small assortment in their stores. And we were thinking, okay, well, we are not that bad. They might be earlier, but at the end, we might be better. And then we started this pick-and-go format with sensor fusions. And with this technology company, which took our idea to the max, trained AI models at these days with us and with some other colleagues in our market.
And that was already like 5-6 years ago, right?
This was 5-6 years ago. And at these days, we figured it works. So there is a breakthrough to that. And The question is still, does the investment in terms of sensors, cameras, weight sensors, whatever sensors you might see in the market, is still an okayish business model? And we are sure that it's a good business model, because we have the problem, as many other companies in Europe, having not enough workforce in our stores or in our warehouses. So even if the business model turns out it's not very good, if you don't have the people in the stores and you don't have automation, it's getting complicated. And therefore we invested into those things, and we had a good team working with the Israel company on that. Turns out it was a smart move, and we opened those stores to the public a couple of years ago. We are still experimenting, by the way. From a customer experience perspective, not an easy task to remove well-known things in a market.
Yeah. And what were like the challenges? What didn't work out in the beginning?
At the very beginning, there was one thing. The customers can actually grab things in the store, and then they leave the store once they have.
Yeah, maybe you explain it quickly how it actually works.
Yeah,
how
the pick and go stores are the typical stores. I would call them a big vending machine. But you walk into that vending machine and you enter at the front door. Maybe your card or your app, and show it with your app. You have probably seen that with Amazon Go or something like that in the past, and that's basically the same model. And then you grab stuff, put it in your backpack or whatever bag you have, and then you typically leave the store. And then when the interesting things begin, because most of the German customers think they are stealing, they are shoplifting or whatever.
That's a German thing, right?
Yeah, it's probably a German thing. But whatever we did in terms of checking out was kind of difficult, because it was not used to the people.
Yeah.
And then I think we have now, with the 8 stores, we have 8 different systems where we train the customer and where we learn from the customer what is the best thing the customer feels well with when he's leaving the store. Typically, what we also do is having a mixed environment. So not only one exit, but many different exits where customers are used to work with. From a, let's say, confidence level in AI, we are pretty good. So no technical doubt about that. It's more I would call it a psychological problem rather than a technical problem.
Yeah. And do the customers make mistakes?
Yes, they do make mistakes. Typically, when it comes to fruits and weight things, we have sometimes a combination of service counters, because then it gets sorted. But when it's a self-service thing, things are not that easy, and we are trying to help the customer. Also, interacting more or less automatically with the customer is also not an easy thing. So that's the reason why we are now working with the AI agents. So we have a team which is working in AI quite some time, obviously. And maybe the agent thing can help us here to explain the customers, well, you did this and that. Some consequences are there before you leave the market. For example, food recognition. It depends where you come from, which cultural aspect you have in your background. You might not know what it is. Everybody knows what an apple is or a banana, but it gets more complicated with other stuff.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So we already talked a little bit about the customers. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the human side of innovation? So I think from a theoretical perspective, it makes so much sense to not have that many people in a store. It saves costs. It's the highest cost factor in the store, like especially in a grocery store, especially when you look at discount. But in the end, your employees have to adapt to the innovation, to new formats, because it's something completely new. And we know the argument, it has always worked that way for the past 100 years in REWE. Why do we need to change it now? And also, how do customers adapt to that change?
Yeah, that's also quite interesting. Still, customers are thinking that we are only doing that so that we need less people in our stores. So we are destroying work in the stores. But if we talk to the employees and explain them what is going on, they really enjoy the way we automate things, because they can now concentrate on, let's say, more important and more challenging work. That's what we see in our stores. As you might know, in the discount stores, they typically have 2 to 3 people in the stores most of the time. So there are not more people in the store. Sometimes maybe if you need to open more cashier systems, they have 4, but that's about it. In a full REWE store, for example, you might end up with 12, 18, 20 people. Totally different. And whatever we do in terms of automating things with AI, with agents or whatever, it pays off, and they really adapt it pretty fast. Since we are a cooperative and we are owned by merchants, we always find merchants who are willing to test things out with us. So we have an innovation department which is pretty international in Germany and the Eastern European countries, and there are some really interesting merchants who want to try more or less everything. Then it gets complicated. Down to too many things at the same time in different cultural zones doesn't work. But the willingness in that format is, I think, an advantage. Having, let's say, a filial system where more or less each store looks the same, behaves the same, is not the perfect ecosystem for doing that. And we have to adapt with whatever we do to our customers in the different areas. Even in Germany, buying something in Hamburg is sometimes different from buying something in Munich. And that's the same if you buy things in Hungary or in Bulgaria or whatever. So adapting to that with the technology and with the right tools is always a thing where you need to work with the people in the store, with the tech guys, tech ladies, and try things out and make it really happen over time. So these cycles are sometimes really long. So the shortest cycle I'm aware of is 6 months. Typically it's a year, sometimes even longer.
And do you meet many barriers in such a large corporation, like people really opposing any kind of innovation?
Of course, every day. Yeah, of course. This is, I think, quite normal because there is, from a sales perspective and being responsible for the sales in our, let's say, grocery, it's always a question on how many, or what are our numbers? If we try things and the numbers go down, bad. So we get resistant, obviously. Because customers behave like they behave, and, you know, and from that perspective, it needs a big amount of trust, and that's some part of my role, talking to my top ex-colleagues and convince them that it makes totally sense to invest in these things from a long-term perspective. Don't look at these short-term numbers. So therefore, when we work with our startups and with new ideas, we typically giving them quite a good amount of time, typically 3 years, some fundings, a couple of millions as a typical startup investment company. And then we are trying over time to make it right for our end customers, whether it's a B2B or B2C customer. But being patient is much easier in such a corporation as we are, but sometimes it's also a pain because we are 100 years old almost, and then the typical saying, we have never done that before, and then I say it's time now.
How do they look at the business cases? Because behind every innovation there are numbers, there are business cases. Is that something that's being challenged a lot, or?
If I compare that to my other startups, and I think I founded 10 more before REWE, this is, to be honest, much easier in the REWE enterprise world. So we are always looking into long-term business cases, into long-term ideas, and that makes it a little bit easier. So there are many also other startups in the market which come to us and they're asking, can we do something? And you get a return in 5 or 6 months. Well, this is nice, but we don't believe that, to be honest. But we tell them, take it serious. We need from the beginning on maybe a little longer than most of other small companies, but then we stick to that idea and then we try it out for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years with you. And this makes it for startups so attractive working with us.
And you just very briefly mentioned the innovation team. I find it super interesting how the research and innovation team works.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit about that team, how they work, how they approach new trends and technologies, how they spread it within the whole corporation?
Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of history to that. When we started with the 4 people at the very beginning in 2014, we obviously had no research and innovation team. We were research and innovation as such. After some years, we became a large business model, and we had this delivery service and some other services up and running, and there was, let's say, the need for, let's say, more innovation. We were more or less sucked up in the day-to-day business. And then I realized, well, we need a small core for developing new ideas and look into the market, what's going on there. Because at that time, we decided to put the, let's say, developed businesses, and I think at that time we had four or five developed businesses, the delivery services, the verticals like zoo and wine and whatever specific businesses, we gave that back to the big mother company, to the organization as such, and then we concentrated on the new stuff. And at these days, we decided, well, we need a team. It was a small team at these days with 10, 12 people, focusing only in the stuff, in the new stuff which was going on in the world. So we are not only looking into Europe. Obviously, we needed to look into Asia. Asia was by far the most interesting market. Then we looked into the US, into other countries like South America. And then we figured from there are good ideas. We need to talk to the people doing that in their countries and then might adapt this to our needs in Europe. And that was let's say, a good move. With this, we found companies in Israel, we found companies in South Korea, we found companies in the US, and some also in Europe. And this gave us a big move forward with ideas. And there are even more, I can tell you, there are even more ideas from that team coming up. I have at least 2 or 3 more ideas for startups from this team coming up. And I think it was a smart move. From a cost perspective, we are still a small team. I think it's roughly 20, 25 people at the moment. And they are...
I think that's quite a big team for innovation.
Well, but with, let's say, 100 billion revenue in terms of money, it's still a small team. But they are well interconnected to the whole group. So we are not only doing that in retail, but also in tourism or some other areas. So from that perspective, it's still small. And it has a couple of pillars. So they're doing real research. So they are developing like engineers these things. We are managing our startups. We have quite a handful or 2 handfuls or even more startups where we don't have the majority but also minority setups. And there's another team searching all the time with partners in the world markets for new good ideas which we could adapt on our side. And there's another team working internally and seeking for ideas which we could potentially push out as we did it with Fulfillmenttools. Yeah. By the way, Fulfillmenttools was a fulfillment team at the very beginning in the delivery service, which built all the software from scratch because there was no real software with a potential to scale up in our needs. And we built that with the idea of microservices and scaling and all these things with a really interesting architects in that team. And that's the same with some other businesses we are currently doing. So, for example, we are looking into digital twin stuff from our stores, warehouses. Really interesting, I can tell you, from an AI perspective. And all the big tech companies, or not all, but at least from the big five, there are 3 companies looking with us into those cases, because they don't have that access to our markets, and they really would like to understand what's going on, and they're helping us, and it's always a partnership thing.
Yeah.
So we cannot finance this from our own only, but doing that in a partnership is a good model.
And also to get like external validation,
Of course,
for the
yeah,
technologies
yeah.
and ideas. So what are the technologies you are most excited about at the moment?
Moment is good. So I'm. I can't remember when I did my PhD. It was something with AI at these days in the late 90s, but not with neural networks. So we just had the idea, but there was no way of neural networks, so we did it with other things. But nowadays, I think with the Gen AI stuff, with advanced analytics in particular, this is a big game changer at the moment. And whenever we look into those things, it's mostly AI. But the combination of domain knowledge within AI is the most promising thing, because general AI is something, I don't know when this is going to happen, maybe pretty late, but having a domain knowledge, maybe in payment, in logistics, in e-commerce, or in the stores, is something which we try to train our models with. And with some of these ideas, we don't have an idea what this might be the outcome.
Yeah.
That's research innovation.
Yeah.
You see what is going to happen. But I still believe it with Gen AI, this is by far the most interesting stuff to look into.
Okay. Come talk to us. Robert, thank you so much for giving some insights into innovation. It's always hard to get some information on this topic, so thank you for opening up here.
Of course.
And
it's a pleasure being on stage with you, Linda.
Same here. And thank you guys for listening. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks.